My name is Ellie Rains, and 7 years after being thrown out like trash by the people who raised me, I walked into a courtroom and stared them down. When the judge slammed the gavel in my favor, I didn't just win the case. I exposed their lies to the entire room. And before they could crawl away, I handed them the same eviction notice they gave me at 18. Tell me, where are you watching from? Type it in the comments. I want to know who's here with me. Because if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, this story is for you. I should have known something was off that night. My dad's voice was too tight, too calm when he said, "Come down here." I'd barely taken off my coat from my shift at the diner. I walked into the kitchen, the same cramped, yellow-lit room where we'd celebrated birthdays and carved pumpkins. But tonight, there was no warmth. Just cold tiles, the bitter smell of coffee gone stale, and my duffel bag sitting on the floor like a dog that knew it wasn't wanted. Dad was standing over it. His hands, always calloused from decades at the garage, clenched at his sides. My mom hovered in the doorway like she might vanish if I blinked. "What's going on?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just nudged the bag with his boot. "That's yours, packed it for you." I stared. "Why would you?" He didn't even look at me, just said it flat. "You're done here, Ellie. Time to take care of yourself." I felt my pulse in my teeth. "What do you mean I'm done? I didn't do anything." "Don't lie," he snapped, finally locking eyes with me. "You think we don't know what you've been up to?" I shook my head, chest tightening. "I've been working and going to school. What do you think I did?" He stepped forward, voice low and angry. "You've been sneaking around, lying, coming home with money you can't explain. And we're not gonna let you drag us down with you." I flinched like he'd hit me. The money, I'd been saving it since I was 15 tips from the diner, tucked away in a coffee can under my bed. For college, for freedom, I hadn't even touched it. "You think I stole it?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just picked up the bag and flung it at me so hard it slid across the floor and hit my shins. I stumbled back, hard in my throat. "Get out," he said. "And don't come back crying when the world chews you up." I turned to my mom. She didn't move. Didn't speak, just stood there like a statue in her fuzzy pink robe, her eyes on the linoleum. "Mom," my voice cracked. Nothing, and then, without warning, he walked past me and opened the front door. The cold March wind cut through the hallway. "You've got 10 seconds, he said, "before I make you leave." I wanted to scream, beg. I wanted to remind him that I'd been their daughter for 18 years, that I did my chores, kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble. But I didn't say any of that. Because something in his eyes told me it wouldn't matter. So I picked up my bag with trembling hands, stepped outside, and turned just in time to see the door slam in my face. No explanation, no goodbye, just the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. I stood there on the porch in the dark, with nowhere to go and nothing but that bag of clothes and a $20 bill in my coat pocket. That was the night I stopped being someone's daughter. And the night I promised myself, one day, they'd regret it. I slept on the floor that first night. Not because I had to, but because I didn't know how to stop shaking. The apartment was just 2 blocks from the high school I'd graduated from 3 weeks earlier. One dusty room, no furniture, a broken heater, and a bathroom sink that leaked like it was crying for me. But it was mine. The old lady who owned the place, Mrs. Krell, didn't ask questions. She just squinted at me through thick glasses and said, "If you have first and last, you're in." And I did. I had the money I'd stashed away for years, carefully counted dollars from diner shifts, babysitting gigs, even that awful job handing out flyers in the snow. I handed over every last cent I had saved, and in return, I got a key and a lease with my name on it. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever been given before. I didn't have a mattress, just a blanket and an old sweatshirt I used as a pillow. Every night, I curled up on the wood floor, stared at the cracked ceiling, and whispered the same promise to myself. "I'll make it. I won't ever need them again." It was the only time I let myself speak of them at all. The mornings were the worst. My alarm would buzz from a cracked phone screen, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the upstairs tenant pacing. Then I'd crawl out from under the blanket, brush my teeth with cold water, and head out before the school buses filled the streets. The high school loomed in the distance like a dare. Some of the teachers waved when they saw me passing by on the sidewalk. Others just looked away, like maybe I reminded them of a problem they didn't fix in time. After classes, I still worked the closing shift at Donna's Diner. Same apron, same regulars, same cracked tile behind the register where I used to dream about college, scholarships, and moving away. Now I scraped ketchup off plates and filled coffee cups for truckers who didn't know my name. I never told anyone what happened. Not even Donna, who used to sneak me milkshakes after my shifts. She noticed something was different, though. "You eating, sweetheart?" she asked one night, her eyes scanning the shadows under mine. I nodded, lied, smiled. That was safer than explaining. The truth was, I was fine, I was surviving, but survival wasn't warm. It wasn't soft. It wasn't kind. It was counting cans of soup. It was washing socks in the bathtub. It was watching the sunrise through cracked blinds and telling yourself, just make it one more day. The days turned into weeks. Then months. I turned 19 eating saltines on the floor while watching cartoons on a neighbor's fuzzy TV through the crack under our shared wall. That night, I found a notebook and started writing things down, not dreams or poetry or anything sentimental. Just facts, receipts, dates, rent payments, every tip I made, every favor I was owed. I documented everything. Because someday I knew I'd need proof that I did this on my own. No help, no handouts, just me. One evening, as I was closing up at the diner, Donna pressed an envelope into my hand. "What's this?" I asked. "Your graduation card." "Found it in my drawer," she said, trying to sound casual. Inside was a $20 bill and a note. "To Ellie, you've got grit. Use this to do something for yourself just once." "Love, Donna," I cried in the stockroom. That night I walked 2 blocks in the cold and bought myself a real pillow. Just one. The kind that held your head like it meant it. It was the first soft thing I'd owned in months. People always think hitting rock bottom happens in a loud, dramatic crash. But for me, it was quiet. A slow erasing. First your bed, then your safety, then your name in their mouths. I used to be Ellie Rains, daughter of Don and Carla. But in that apartment I was just Ellie. Just a girl with aching feet, a fire inside her chest, and a list of reasons she wouldn't break. And for a long time, that had to be enough. It had been 7 years since that night. 7 years since I stood on a frozen porch in Illinois with nothing but a duffel bag and a gaping hole where family used to live. 7 years of working, saving, and quietly surviving. Now I was 25 years old and living in San Diego, a city where the sunsets looked like brushstrokes and no one asked you where you came from, only where you were going. I liked that about this place. I'd built something here, not a glamorous life, but a steady one. I was a dental assistant at a small clinic, rented a modest studio above a flower shop, and spent most of my weekends reading library books on a worn patio chair I got from a thrift store. I was anonymous, safe, in control. That's why the ER visit felt so jarring. Like the universe had tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Not so fast." The ache started in my jaw one afternoon at work. A deep, pulsing throb that made it hard to concentrate. I thought maybe I'd clenched too hard in my sleep again, but by the next morning the pain was unbearable. I could barely chew toast. My left ear rang. My entire face throbbed with pressure. "I think it's an abscess," I told the triage nurse at the hospital, pressing a tissue to my swollen cheek. She nodded sympathetically, took my ID, and typed my social security number into the computer. Then she paused. Her brow furrowed as she leaned closer to the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the overhead lights and the beeping of a monitor from down the hall. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted from the screen to me and back again like she was trying to reconcile something that didn't make sense. "Could you confirm your social security number?" she asked slowly. I did. She looked again, then tapped a few keys and blinked in disbelief. "Sorry, this is just strange," she muttered. "What's strange?" I asked, my voice dry. Her eyes lifted, cautious now. "There's a flag on your file. It says you've been marked. Wanted for questioning by Interpol for the past 25 years. I laughed, because it was ridiculous. "I think you've got the wrong Ellie Rains," I said lightly, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. She didn't laugh. "I'm going to need to check with the attending physician," she said, standing. "Please stay here." She disappeared down the hallway before I could ask anything else. I sat there in a stiff vinyl chair in the corner of the ER, cradling my jaw and trying to make sense of what just happened. Wanted by Interpol. What could they possibly want with me? I wasn't even born overseas. I mean, I didn't think I was. My birth certificate said I was born in Illinois. I'd seen it once. A copy, anyway. When I applied for my first job at 15. Carla had printed it off from her files in the kitchen drawer. But then again, I never saw the original. Suddenly, I was hyperaware of everything around me: the antiseptic scent, the flickering fluorescent lights, the sound of distant heels clicking on tile. This has to be a mistake, has to be a glitch, has to be someone with the same name. I kept telling myself that over and over like a prayer. But the longer I waited, the more I felt something shift inside me. A cold, creeping sensation I hadn't felt since that night I was thrown out. The feeling that nothing was solid anymore, that your life, your identity, could disappear in a second. Finally, a doctor came over. He was young, with dark curls and tired eyes. He looked at me like I was something fragile but suspicious. "Ellie Rains." "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm Dr. Patel. Before we treat your infection, I need to ask you a few questions." "Why?" I asked. "What's going on?" he exhaled. "I'm not supposed to tell you much, but your name triggered an international alert in our system. That doesn't happen unless someone made sure it stayed active." "I don't understand. I've never even left the country." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll still treat you, but we're required to notify the authorities when this kind of flag comes up." "Wait, what authorities?" He stood. "They'll explain. In the meantime, we're moving you to a secure room for your safety." That's when it hit me. They weren't waiting for an explanation. They were waiting for someone to come for me. They took my phone first, then my bag, then my name. The room they moved me into wasn't sterile like a hospital, no soft beeping monitors or white sheets. It felt like an in-between place. A holding pen. 4 walls the color of chewed gum, a metal chair that creaked every time I shifted, and a plastic cup of water that no one ever told me I could drink. I didn't sleep the first night. Or the second. No one told me why I was there. No one even said the word Interpol again. They took my vitals, gave me Tylenol for my jaw, fed me bland meals through a slot in the door like I was a stray animal they didn't want to touch. When I asked questions, the guards stared right past me like I wasn't speaking at all. It was like being erased in slow motion. On the third night, something cracked. I was curled on the bench in the corner, wearing the scratchy sweatpants and oversized t-shirt they'd given me, my arms wrapped around my knees. The tiny cell was so cold the metal toilet hummed. I pressed my forehead to the wall, whispered to myself, "What did I do?" And the thing was, I wasn't just scared anymore. I was furious. I'd built a life with my bare hands. I had worked hard. I never broke the law, never even cheated on a test in high school. And now I was being treated like a criminal because of a file someone forgot to delete. What kind of mistake lasted 25 years? The next morning, they put me on a bus. No warning, no conversation. Just 2 guards in dark uniforms knocking on the door and motioning silently. I thought maybe they were moving me to a hospital to fix my jaw, or that someone had finally realized this was a mess-up. A misunderstanding. That they were going to apologize. But when I stepped outside, blinking against the sun for the first time in days, I saw a transport bus idling by the curb. Barred windows. Thick tires. A logo I didn't recognize. It wasn't going to any hospital. They didn't cuff me right away. Just sat me alone in the front row and closed the cage door behind me, but behind me, the rest of the bus was full. Hardened, tired, silent women, some with handcuffs, some in ankle chains. Tattoos, bruises, blank stares. I could feel their eyes on me. One woman behind me leaned forward and muttered, "You don't belong here, honey." I turned my head. "How do you know?" She shrugged. "You flinched when they opened the door." The drive lasted 10 hours. I didn't know where we were going. There were no signs, no names, just pine trees and long stretches of road with no gas stations or exits. The guards didn't speak unless to tell someone to pipe down or sit back. I asked once, "Where are you taking me?" The one nearest me barely looked up. "Just sit tight." When the bus finally pulled to a stop, dusk had fallen. We were deep in forest country. A massive chain-link fence surrounded a set of squat concrete buildings with tall spotlights. A compound, not a prison exactly, but not far from it either. They called my name first, Ellie Rains. A guard with a clipboard and an accent I couldn't place pointed me toward a smaller building, separate from the others. As I stepped off the bus, I caught one last glimpse of the other women being led in the opposite direction, their heads down, their chains clinking softly. Wherever they were going, I wasn't going with them. That didn't feel like mercy. It felt like isolation. Inside the building, I was led through 2 checkpoints and down a narrow hallway, then into a cell with steel walls, a single cot, and no window. This one didn't even have a toilet, just a metal bucket in the corner. I wasn't asked anything. No one told me what I was being accused of. I wanted to scream, call someone, look at my records, I'm a dental assistant, I pay taxes, I have a library card. But I didn't scream. Because I knew deep down no one was listening. That night, lying on the cot in the dark, the ache in my jaw now dull and constant, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I had heard my mother's voice. Not the night she watched him throw me out. Before that. Maybe the summer I was 15, when I had the flu and she made me toast and rubbed my back with quiet care. Or maybe when I got my first A on a math test and she wrote a sticky note that said, "Proud of you." But the memories felt slippery now, like they belonged to someone else. Was my whole life a lie? That was the question that bloomed inside me and refused to die. If someone had flagged me at birth, if someone had been looking for me for decades, what did that say about the people who raised me? What did it say about me? I lost track of time in that cell. There was no clock, no light from outside, just the constant buzz of the overhead bulb that flickered every few minutes like it was debating whether to die. Sometimes it went out completely for a second or two, long enough for darkness to settle like a warning, and then it would sputter back, humming louder than before. That bulb became my sun and moon. My only proof that time was still crawling forward. The room smelled like rust and bleach. I slept in my clothes, curled on the thin mattress, and used my shoes as a pillow. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared, because if I let my mind go too far, I was afraid it might not come back. On the second day, at least I think it was the second, I heard voices outside the door, not English. Sharp, rhythmic syllables in a language I couldn't place. I sat up and moved quietly to the door, pressing my ear to the cold steel. Two men. One voice was stern, low, clearly giving orders. The other replied more cautiously, almost apologetically. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel the shift in power. Then footsteps, fading away. I waited, breath held, but no one came in. That night I spoke out loud for the first time in hours. Not to anyone, just to the dark. Was my whole life a lie? The words echoed faintly off the walls. I thought about Carla and Dawn, their silence, their coldness, the way they looked at me that night like I was someone else. Maybe I always was. Memories started unraveling inside me. Not dramatic ones, not moments of obvious betrayal, just little inconsistencies. The way Carla avoided talking about my birth. The fact that there were no baby pictures of me before age 2. The time Dawn got angry when I asked about our family history for a school project and told me to stop digging into things that don't matter. And the weirdest one, I suddenly remembered a photo I found as a kid, tucked in a shoebox in the back of Dawn's closet. A woman I didn't recognize holding a baby in front of a stone building. I thought maybe it was an aunt. When I asked, Dawn snatched the photo and growled, "That's no one, don't go snooping again." I was 8. I never saw that photo again. Now, sitting in a foreign cell in a building I couldn't locate on a map, I wondered if that woman was my real mother. If that baby was me. And if everything I thought I knew, my name, my home, my past, was just a version of the truth someone else wrote for me. I didn't eat much. The food came through a panel in the wall, a metal tray with overcooked rice, boiled vegetables, and something they called meat but never smelled quite right. I picked at it. Ate enough to stay upright. Nothing more. Sleep came in fits. My dreams were fragmented images of my old apartment, the smell of fryer oil from Donna's diner, and sometimes Dawn's voice, always shouting, always ending with that door slamming shut again. But one night, I don't know if it was real or not, I dreamed of that woman in the photo. She was standing in the snow, holding out her arms, and I was running toward her. On what I guessed was the 5th day, I heard the whispers. Different this time. Closer. Outside my door. In English, she doesn't know, not yet. She's starting to ask questions, we need clearance. A pause, then footsteps again, but slower, almost like someone had stopped in front of my door and lingered. I held my breath. A key scraped faintly in the lock, then nothing, just silence. And then click, but the door didn't open. They'd unlocked it, but left it closed. Why was it a mistake, a test? I didn't move, didn't dare try the handle. I just sat there, knees to my chest, listening to the silence press in around me. That night I couldn't stop thinking, what if they want me to panic? What if they were watching? What if this whole thing, my isolation, the lack of answers, the flickering bulb, the voices, was part of something bigger? Was I in trouble, or was I a threat? The scariest part was, I didn't know which one I wanted to be. I thought about walking out, trying the door, seeing what was on the other side. But my gut said no. So instead, I lay back on the cot, stared at the bulb, and made a decision. If no one was going to tell me who I really was, then I'd find out myself. If my past was stolen, I was going to steal it back. No matter what was waiting on the other side of that door. The door exploded inward before I could stand. Not opened. Exploded. 1 second I was sitting on the edge of the cot, half asleep, and the next, 3 men in black coats with silver badges burst through like thunder rolling off the hinges. I flinched backward, raising my hands instinctively. Wait, what is this? The first man barked something sharp in another language, Czech maybe, Slovak, and then pointed at the guards behind him. Remove her shackles, I blinked. I don't, what shackles? Only then did I realize my wrists were trembling against my thighs. No metal bound me, but my muscles were tight, curled from being trapped so long in silence. They felt shackled. One of the newcomers, a guard, clearly stepped aside. The man in front strode in further, tall, dark hair but graying at the edges. A fitted navy coat that didn't look like it belonged to anyone from around here. His eyes scanned the room like a man who wasn't used to being disobeyed. He landed on me. And stopped. We stared at each other for what felt like a full minute. His mouth moved, almost too quietly to hear. Iliska, I flinched. What did you say? Iliska, that's your real name, he said, stepping closer, softer now. I'm Luca, I'm your brother. I don't remember standing, but suddenly I was on my feet. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not, I don't have a brother, you've got the wrong person. Luca didn't move. He held something in his gloved hand. Slowly, he unfolded it and held it out. A photograph. Worn and faded, like it had been touched too many times. In it, a woman young, delicate-featured with auburn hair and serious eyes, held a baby in front of a gray building with ivy-covered stone. It was the same woman from Don's closet. And the baby, even with the photo's age, I could see it. It was me. I didn't speak. Couldn't, the air seemed to shift around me. My mother, Luca said, voice lower now. Our mother, her name was Ivana. You were taken from us when you were a baby, illegally adopted out of the country after the system collapsed. I tried to breathe. What system? The Czechoslovak registry, he said. Back in the early 2000s, during the political restructuring, some adoption records were, how do you say, manipulated. You were placed in the U.S. as if your birth didn't exist. We've been searching for you since you were 3. I sat back down before my knees gave out. Luca knelt in front of me, eyes intense. The people who raised you, they knew, or if they didn't at first, they figured it out. There were payments, a trail. My mouth was dry. They said I was abandoned, no family, they never let me ask questions, said I was ungrateful if I brought it up. Luca's jaw tightened. You weren't abandoned, Iliska, you were stolen. The guards behind him murmured something and Luca nodded once. It's not safe here, we have to leave now. There are officials involved who'd rather your name stay buried. But you're not invisible anymore. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was nod as he reached for my hand and pulled me gently up. His grip was warm, firm, steady, like he'd been waiting years for this. Outside, the air was sharp with pine and damp earth. A black SUV idled at the gate. I didn't look back as we crossed the compound grounds, didn't want to see that gray cell again. As I climbed into the back seat, my hand still in Luca's, I realized I wasn't being rescued. I was being claimed. The tires hummed against the wet pavement as we sped through a forest that felt untouched by time. Pines leaned close to the road like they were listening, whispering things I still wasn't ready to hear. I sat in the backseat of the black SUV, still wrapped in the coat Luca had placed around my shoulders when we left the compound. It smelled like clean wool and something faintly citrus, unfamiliar but grounding. Outside, the sun was setting behind gray clouds, casting everything in soft, aching light. Luca turned halfway in his seat, his body angled toward me. You okay? I wanted to say yes, that I was fine, but I just nodded. You don't have to believe everything yet, he said gently. Just listen. I did. Because even though I didn't know him, even though my head was spinning with too many pieces of a life I didn't recognize, there was something about his voice. Not just the accent, something quieter beneath it. Like he'd said these words 100 times in his head before finally getting to speak them out loud. You were born in Prague, he said. February 18, 2000. Your name was Iliska Karolina Merk. Our mother, Ivana, raised us alone after our father passed. I was 10 when you were born. I used to hold your hand during naps so you wouldn't cry. I stared at him. You remember that? Luca smiled faintly. You had a habit of kicking off your blanket. I'd tuck you back in and hum until you fell asleep. It was the kind of detail no stranger would invent. You disappeared when you were 3, he continued. One day we woke up and you were gone. We were told you'd been taken to a care facility temporarily, health paperwork, they said, but you never came back. I swallowed hard. They told me I was abandoned, that my parents never claimed me. He looked out the window, jaw tightening. They falsified documents. There were people making money off desperate families and vulnerable children. You were listed as an orphan under a different name and the adoption was rushed through. Your records disappeared from the central system. But how could you find me? We didn't, not right away. Luca's voice darkened. For years, we searched. Then 5 years ago, our mother passed away. I took over everything, her records, her letters. She never stopped believing you were alive. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. Slowly, he handed it to me. It was a small locket, the metal worn at the edges, the clasp delicate. Inside was a photo, me as a toddler, grinning, hair wild, eyes too big for my face. She wore that every day, Luca said. Even when she got sick, she never stopped calling you by your real name. I closed my eyes, chest tight. Why didn't anyone try harder to stop it, to find me? They did, he said, but the man who processed your file was later convicted for falsifying dozens of adoptions. He disappeared before we could question him about yours. By then, you were already in the States. The agency that placed you no longer existed, and the trail went cold. And Carla and Don, I trailed off. They knew, Luca was quiet. We don't know when they figured it out. Payments made to them didn't match legal adoptions. They weren't vetted, not fully. They moved towns twice during your first year in the US, probably to avoid follow-ups. I stared out the window, trying to make sense of it all. All those years of feeling like I didn't belong, wasn't wanted, weren't just teenage angst. They were echoes of something real. I'm not angry, I said softly, surprising myself. Luca didn't speak. I'm just tired of not knowing where I come from. He nodded once. That's why I brought you back, to give you the truth, all of it. I looked at him. I believe you, I said, and I did. Not because the photo proved anything. Not because the locket made it real. But because, for the first time in years, someone was sitting across from me with nothing to hide. The estate didn't look real at first. It was all soft stone and arched windows, tucked into a hillside surrounded by cypress trees and crumbling vineyards. Ivy crawled up the walls like it had been waiting for someone to come home. I stepped out of the SUV with my heart pounding so hard I almost missed Luca's voice behind me. They bought it after you were born, he said quietly. She always hoped you'd grow up here. My boots crunched against the gravel driveway as I stared up at it. This place, this life should have been mine, not in the entitled, spoiled sense, but in the aching, what could have been way. The house smelled like lavender and old books. Inside, it was warm, wood floors, velvet curtains, creaking staircases, familiar without ever having seen it before. Luca gave me a quiet tour. Every hallway whispered a version of myself I'd never got to become. That night, I slept in a guest room that once belonged to me, and in the morning, I learned just how much had really been taken. The will was read in a sitting room with too many chairs and not enough light. A lawyer named Marcella, brisk and buttoned up, read from a thick folder while Luca stood silently behind her. Our parents had named both of us heirs, but I inherited everything. Their estate, the land, their savings, their art collection, a charitable foundation they'd established years ago in our family name. They left me a letter, I said, staring down at the thick envelope Marcella handed me. Luca nodded. They wrote it together after your 4th birthday. I never read it. I didn't open it yet. My hands were still trembling. Marcella cleared her throat, packing the folder. As of this morning, your name has been restored in all Central European records, and once the American systems are notified of the adoption fraud, we'll begin clearing your identity. It felt too big, too fast, too late, but still like justice. I looked at Luca, still unsure what I was supposed to feel. He didn't push. He just said, they wanted to make sure when you came back you'd never have to depend on anyone who hurt you again. It was a beautiful thought, right up until my past came knocking. It was late afternoon when Luca's phone buzzed. He stepped out of the room to take the call, but I heard his voice shift instantly, tense, clipped, cold. When he came back in, his face said it all. What is it? I asked. He hesitated, then offered me the screen. It was a video call, and on it, Carla and Don. I didn't even recognize them at first. They were older now. Grayer. Don looked bloated, red-faced, like he'd aged in the sun too long. Carla's mouth was tight, drawn in that disapproving purse she used to give me when I forgot to take the trash out. Ellie, she said, her voice coated in a layer of performance. Or is it Aliska now? I didn't speak. Don leaned in, smirking. Looks like you've done well for yourself, all this European fairy tale. Carla's smile twisted. We're not here to fight. We just want to be fair. Luca stepped into view behind me. You don't get to define fair. We raised her, Don snapped. We gave her a home, fed her, clothed her. All we're saying is we deserve compensation. My chest tightened. Compensation. Alimony, Carla said sweetly. Emotional and financial restitution. For raising a child that wasn't legally ours, that's a burden we shouldn't have had to carry. The sheer nerve of it stole my breath. You kicked me out at 18, I said. Told me to take care of myself, Don shrugged. Doesn't mean you weren't ours. You were in our home for 15 years. That counts for something. Carla leaned closer to the camera. You owe us, Aliska, and trust me, we're prepared to take legal action to get what we're due. Luca didn't blink. Try it, you'll lose. The call ended with a smirk from Don and a chilling final line from Carla. You took everything and left us to rot. Don't think we're going to let that slide. I stared at the screen for a long time after the call ended. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something sharper, colder, resolved, because they hadn't just hurt me once. They were still trying. We didn't waste time. The next morning, Luca and I sat across from Marcella at a long mahogany table in a sunlit office that overlooked the estate's vineyards. Legal pads, folders, highlighters, everything laid out like a war room. No velvet gloves, no gentle easing into it. I didn't need gentleness anymore. I needed results. They've filed in Chicago, Marcella said, tapping the manila envelope in front of her. It's not criminal, not yet. It's a civil petition, alimony, emotional damages, and something they're calling loss of parental investment. Creative, insulting, but not entirely surprising. I almost laughed. Loss of investment, like I was a stock that didn't perform well enough. Exactly, she replied. It's designed to provoke guilt. To bait you into settling. I didn't flinch. I'm not settling. Marcella raised an eyebrow. Good, because neither are we. She slid a document across the table, an eviction notice dated March 22, 2018. My name in black ink, signed by Don Rains. I stared at it for a long time. They always said it was temporary, I murmured. That they were just giving me space to learn responsibility. Marcella didn't respond to that. She didn't have to. Next came a stack of emails, retrieved from an old cloud account I hadn't touched in years. Messages I'd sent at 19, 20, 21. Pleading for tax forms, insurance documents, any trace of paperwork to help me file for college aid or find an apartment. They never replied. Then Luca reached into a file folder and pulled out something I hadn't expected. My old notebook. The one I used to track tips and rent and nights spent without power. I didn't even know it still existed. Somehow, he'd recovered it from my last apartment in San Diego. I flipped through the pages slowly. Rent receipts, bank slips, tally marks for how many hours I'd worked each week. There were notes written in the margins. March 25, no power but made rent. April 3, skipped dinner, needed soap plus toothpaste. May 10, cried in the bathroom at Donna's. I closed it and set it down like it was radioactive. Luca leaned forward, his voice quiet. We bury them in truth. I nodded, jaw clenched. Let's do it. We spent hours building the case. Marcella drafted the response petition while Luca compiled a timeline. When I was thrown out, when I moved, when I contacted legal aid for help finding my birth certificate. Every date lined up. Every lie Don and Carla told was now countered with something they never expected me to keep evidence. Marcella slid one last file toward me. What's this? I asked. She smiled slightly. Photos. Witness statements from your time in San Diego. Donna, the diner owner, sent a letter. She says you were more responsible than most adults she knew. She wrote that she once gave you $20 for your birthday and you bought a pillow. I swallowed hard. She remembered that. She said you never once complained, but she always suspected something wasn't right at home. It was too much. For a moment, I just sat there, my eyes stinging. They tried to erase me, but I'd been documenting myself all along. That night, Luca and I sat outside on the terrace. The air was cool, the vineyards glowing under the moonlight. I held the eviction letter in one hand, the diner letter in the other. They're going to try and twist everything, I said. Say I was ungrateful, say I made it up. They've already failed, Luca said. They just don't know it yet. I looked at him. Why are you so sure? He he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because they underestimated the one thing they should have feared from the beginning. What, you? I returned to Chicago in winter. The city had the same brutal wind I remembered, slicing through coats, numbing fingers, reminding you not everything is built to keep you warm. It hadn't changed much, but I had. The courthouse was a cold block of stone with flickering fluorescents and buzzing radiators. Still, the minute I stepped inside, it felt warmer than the home Dawn and Carla raised me in. Luca walked beside me, silent, steady. Marcella followed with 2 briefcases and a look that could split wood. The courtroom wasn't large, but every inch of it pulsed with tension. I could feel it sitting in my chest like a second heartbeat. And then I saw them, Dawn and Carla, front row, matching navy coats. Fake grief smeared across their faces like stage makeup. Carla clutched a tissue she hadn't used. Dawn stared at me like I was the problem. I didn't look away. The case was labeled Rains v. Rains, which made me want to laugh. They were suing me under the name they gave me, the name they used when they signed away their responsibility, but I wasn't their Rains anymore. I was Eliska Carolina Merck, and I was done playing their daughter. Marcella stood first, calm, unapologetic. She began by laying out the timeline, the illegal adoption, the falsified records, the wrongful abandonment. Then she introduced me, not as a defendant, but as a survivor. She was discarded, Marcella said simply, placing the eviction notice on the judge's bench. At 18, no legal guardianship, no support, forced to sleep on floors and survive on diner tips while these individuals who now claim emotional labor cut her off completely. The judge looked up. Do you have evidence of that? Marcella nodded. We have more than evidence. We have her truth meticulously recorded for years. One by one, she laid them out, the eviction, the unanswered emails, handwritten budget notebooks, the witness letters, photos of my first apartment empty except for a blanket on the floor, a receipt from Donna's diner dated 2 weeks after I was kicked out with double shift circled in red ink. Then came the journal, the one I'd kept the night I was thrown out. Marcella read the first few lines aloud. I didn't do anything wrong, but he threw my bag across the floor. Mom didn't even look at me. They said I could take care of myself now. So I guess I will. The courtroom was silent. Even Carla stopped pretending to dab her eyes. Dawn's lawyer objected, claiming emotional manipulation. But it was too late. The courtroom wasn't being swayed by tears, it was being drowned in facts. And when it was my turn to speak, I stood. Not with rage, not with tears, but with the same steady quiet I'd built my life on. They didn't raise me, I said. They housed me, they controlled me. And when I no longer served their purpose, they discarded me like something expired. I looked directly at Carla. You taught me to survive by watching you survive things I never understood. You taught me silence meant safety, and now you want money for the years I spent teaching myself how to be whole. Then to Dawn. You told me to take care of myself. I did, and I will. But I won't pay you for the privilege of abandoning me. The judge didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, petition denied. No alimony, no damages. This court finds no parental obligation fulfilled and thus none abandoned. The gavel fell. It was over, but it wasn't quiet, because the moment we stepped out into the hall, Dawn lunged forward, voice low and venomous. This isn't over. Luca stepped between us so fast I barely saw it. Yes, it is, he said, smiling coldly. Come after her again, and we'll bury you legally. For the first time in my life, Dawn looked scared. And for the first time, I wasn't. The strangest part wasn't the victory. It was the silence that followed. We left the courtroom and walked into the cold Chicago air, and for the first time in years, there were no lies chasing me, no fake smiles or slammed doors. Just the wind, the snow, and the weight I'd been carrying slowly sliding off my back. Luca walked beside me, quiet but close. He didn't speak right away, and he didn't need to, because something had just ended, and something else had just begun. I expected to feel triumphant, but all I felt was clean, like someone had rinsed shame off me that I didn't even know I'd been wearing. We were halfway down the courthouse steps when I heard footsteps behind us. I turned. Carla and Dawn stood there, framed in the gray afternoon like statues chiseled from spite. Dawn's jaw was locked so tight I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. Carla looked pale but not shaken. Not yet. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. No, I said, you've said enough. You'll regret this, Dawn growled. I already did, I said, taking a step toward them. I spent years regretting trusting you. Years thinking I owed you for feeding me, for keeping me clothed, for not hitting me when you wanted to. Years thinking I was lucky that you didn't love me because at least you didn't destroy me. They froze. I didn't. You spent my entire childhood reminding me that I was a burden. And now, because I've built something, because someone finally wanted me back, you think you can cash in. Don opened his mouth, but I cut him off. No, you don't get to rewrite this. You threw me out. You turned your backs and shut the door. You left me with nothing. And now that I've made it through the fire, you want to sell me the water? Carla's voice cracked. We gave you a home. No, I snapped, sharper now. You gave me a roof, a bed, and a lifetime of silence. But a home, a real one. You can't give what you don't have. They looked so small standing there. Two people who used to terrify me, who used to decide if I ate, if I spoke, if I was allowed to feel anything at all. Now they looked like exactly what they were, desperate, powerless, and irrelevant. Then Lucas stepped forward. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He simply leaned toward Don and Carla and said in the calmest, most terrifying tone I've ever heard, "Come after her again and we'll bury you legally." Don blinked. Carla stepped back, finally realizing the power they used to hold wasn't just gone, it was never real. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked down the last steps and kept going. Not away from them, but toward myself. Back at the estate, I stood on the balcony overlooking the vineyard. The sun was dipping low, turning the sky the color of honey and rust. A soft wind rustled the grapevines, and the weight in my chest was finally gone. Luca joined me with 2 mugs of tea. You did it, he said. I shook my head. We did. He placed a folded document on the table beside me. Your name's been restored in every system. Passport, birth certificate, medical files, all official now. I looked at the paper, then out at the land that belonged to my family, my family. I'm not hiding anymore, I whispered. Not who I was, not who I am. Luca nodded. You don't have to. For a long moment we just sat in the quiet, not broken, not afraid, just free. I woke before the sun. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for anything. Not a slammed door, not a withheld truth, not a demand wrapped in guilt, just silence. A soft, honest silence. I stepped out onto the terrace barefoot, a thick sweater around my shoulders and a mug of tea warming my hands. Below me the vineyard stretched wide and quiet, the vines still asleep in the cool morning. The sky was a soft lavender, split with ribbons of gold. I hadn't cried since the verdict. Not when Carla threatened me. Not when the judge said, "Petition denied." Not even when I looked at my real name on that legal document. But here, in the slow unfolding of morning light over the land my parents had once walked, the tears came. They weren't loud, just quiet, steady proof that I'd finally stopped holding my breath. Luca joined me, setting a thick envelope down beside my mug. This came in last night, from the ministry. Inside, official copies of my restored birth records. My name, my origin, my place in the world finally fixed. I looked up at him, eyes wet. So this is who I am, he smiled. It's who you've always been. I pressed the paper to my chest, heart full in a way I didn't know existed, not because I'd won, but because I'd survived long enough to come home. 3 years later, I stood on a stage in Strasbourg, staring out at a crowd of strangers who had come to hear me speak. Behind me, a screen lit with my name, Aliska Carolina Merck, and the title of the session, Reclaiming What Was Taken. In front of me, survivors, lawmakers, advocates, foster care alumni. People from all over the world gathered to fight the very systems that had once swallowed me whole. I took a breath. My past was erased, I began. Not by accident, but by design. I was taken from the family who loved me and given to people who never saw me as anything more than a burden to bear. Or worse, a debt to collect. A few nods, a few tears. But here's the part they didn't plan for, I continued. I remembered, I documented, I fought, and now I help others do the same. I spoke about the day I stood in court, about the lies that fell apart when held up to the light, about the woman I became when no one was watching and how I used that strength to find my way back. They tried to steal my identity, I said, but they couldn't take my truth. Applause thundered through the hall. In the front row, Luca sat with our mother's locket in his palm, his eyes shining with pride. And in that moment I realized something. This story was never just about revenge. It was about reclamation, about turning silence into testimony, and about lighting a path for someone else to follow. If you've ever had to fight for your voice, your name, or your truth, I see you. Ellie's journey may be fiction, but the pain, the power, and the rise, that's real. Drop a comment if her story moved you. And remember, sometimes justice isn't loud, it's just final.